Hello, and welcome to Module 4. In Module 4, we are going to be looking at both Chapter 6 and Chapter 9. This is the only point in the semester where we aren't going to be in order of the way that the chapters are presented in the book. And it's because it occurs at a time that roughly is at the midpoint of the semester. And I decided that the best approach would be to group the governmental institutions that are most similar to each other. And Chapter 7 and Chapter 8 actually cover the president and then the executive bureaucracy. And because those fit together in the executive branch, it made sense to have those two chapters together. Now, Chapter 6 and Chapter 9 have some similarities, mostly in that they're government institutions that are not the presidency, but also they just aren't Chapter 7 and Chapter 8 as we move forward. This will leave us with the opportunity of having Chapters 1 through 6 and Chapter 9 on the midterm, while Chapters 7, 8, 10, 11, and 12 will be in the second half of the semester and will be covered primarily on the final exam. Hopefully this doesn't cause any confusion for anyone. If you've been reading so far ahead that you've already finished Chapter 7, it will give you a leg up later, but now you'll have to go ahead and read Chapter 9 so that you'll be prepared. I encourage you all to pay a great deal of attention to the key terms and to look at the voiceover PowerPoints for Chapter 6 and Chapter 9. I think that if you pay a great deal of attention to those, you'll be in really good stead for at least these chapters' contributions to the midterm exam. Remember, after we finish this module, Module 5 will actually cover the study guide and the midterm exam. So I think that it will be very useful to you to start to think about the midterm as we move forward. After all, I would say that most students do very well on the chapter module quizzes that we have, and that if there's any difficulty that students have, it shows up on the midterm and on the final. So if you can do well on the midterm and final, I think that most all of you will be extremely successful in this class. Now, Chapter 6 covers Congress, and there's many ideas that I'm hoping that you're going to pick up in looking at Congress. One of the things to keep in mind is that the U.S. Congress is a bicameral legislature. By bicameral, we mean that it has two chambers. It has a House of Representatives, which is often called the lower house of Congress, and it has a U.S. Senate, and the Senate is the upper house of Congress. Now, when we're looking at some of the things that I want you all to be familiar with as it relates to the House of Representatives and the Senate, I'm going to ask you to be familiar with some of the people who are in the leadership. And by leadership, we mean the top leaders. There's actually many people who might be considered part of the leadership who are lower ranking than these people. But in the House of Representatives, I'm hoping that you will be familiar with the name and the responsibilities of the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader, the Majority Whip, the Republican leader who's called the Minority Leader, and the Minority Whip. The leaders represent the party on the floor of the House of Representatives, while the whips, as they're called, are the chief vote counters. They talk about whipping a vote, meaning to strongly encourage the members to vote in a certain way. We haven't quite reached the point in American history where people are physically beaten for their votes, but the name comes from sort of this idea of compelling or strongly encouraging a vote. And when we talk about the role of political parties, sometimes what that is determining whether it would be useful to try to persuade members of Congress to vote maybe against their own private interests in favor of the party's interests when it comes time to have key votes in the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Senate, while it is the other house, actually has a very different way of organizing its leadership. First of all, it has what are called formal leaders, which is to say the people who are officially the top leaders of the U.S. Senate, the presiding officers, and the actual day-to-day leaders and most powerful members of the U.S. Senate. So the official presiding officer of the U.S. Senate, a job that might be compared to Speaker of the House in terms of the fact that it's a person who's actually sitting at the table recognizing people as Congress is officially supposed to operate, is the Vice President of the United States. So currently that's Kamala Harris. She is the President of the Senate. So the Vice President of the United States is the President of the Senate. We don't call them the Speaker of the Senate. We call them the President of the Senate. And she, though, does not actually preside over the Senate, except in, ceremonial functions. When President Biden gives his State of the Union address, you'll see her sitting next to Nancy Pelosi, representing the U.S. Senate. However, since she's rarely there except for when it's necessary to break a tie vote, the actual presiding officer of the U.S. Senate is someone called the President Pro Tem, or the President Pro Tempore, Tempore. And this person's job is to serve as the President of the Senate when the Vice President isn't there. And again, this is still largely a ceremonial position. The President Pro Tem of the Senate is somebody who is often a very important and powerful senior member of the majority party. Patrick Leahy is the longest serving Democrat. And that's usually how you get the position. You're the longest serving member of the majority party. But as a committee chair, this is what he spends most of his time doing. And it's more his responsibility to appoint people to serve as the person sitting as the presiding officer in the Senate. Now, again, these are largely ceremonial roles. The person who is actually the leader of the Senate, the most powerful single person, is named Charles Schumer, often called Chuck Schumer. He's a senator from New York, and very powerful because as the majority leader, he has something called the right of first recognition, meaning that when several senators wish to speak on the floor, he has the right to be recognized first. Now, he's not allowed to interrupt somebody who's already recognized, but say when that person finishes talking, he becomes the person who would be called next. Except in practice, what he does is he organizes the operation of the Senate largely up to him, but in consultation with the minority leader. The minority leader is Mitch McConnell, a senator from Kentucky, who used to be the majority leader when the Republicans were the majority party. The Senate also has whips, although they have a tendency to call this second official in each party the assistant leader. So the assistant majority leader and the assistant minority leader. Well, anyway, all these positions you should know the name of the person who holds the position and the job the responsibilities that they have. The slides will talk a little bit about the committee system. The slides will talk a little bit about how bills become law. You should try to familiarize yourself with all of these. Now, Chapter 9 changes pace a little bit. Chapter 9 talks about the the Supreme Court and the lower federal courts. And there's an awful lot of interesting things going on with the federal courts. We had a great deal of controversy during the Trump administration as President Trump tried to appoint new judges to fill several vacancies, and the Democrats resisted him. This isn't uncommon. However, studies show that President Trump maybe received a little more resistance than presidents had before. Some of this is because of controversies related to Merrick Garland, who interestingly enough, Merrick Garland is now the Attorney General of the United States. But back in 2016, when President Obama sought to replace Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court, the Republicans used their majority to block consideration of Garland. And it touched off a new period of controversy. The Republicans made it a little bit easier to confirm Supreme Court justices, and we pay more attention maybe to Supreme Court justices than to other federal judges. President Trump was eventually able to confirm 3 new Supreme Court justices, including one soon before he left office in October of 2020. Yeah. The 2020 was a long year. It sometimes feels like things that happened in 2020 maybe happened when I was a kid. However, in October of 2020, the most recent Supreme Court justice was confirmed, and this was Amy Coney Barrett. But President Trump was able to confirm 3 justices, and we talk a little bit about each of those 3. We give a background on each of the 9 Supreme Court justices. I would say that knowing who Trump's justices were would be useful, mostly Barrett for being the most recent, I'd say. Probably you should be familiar with John Roberts, who's the Chief Justice. Being familiar with Clarence Thomas, who's the longest serving justice on the court, would probably be worthwhile. As I'm looking at the types of exam questions I might ask, you're probably okay if you're only familiar with who the Chief Justice is. There's many other questions that we can ask related to the federal judiciary. Another thing that we would be interested in is the structure of the federal judiciary. In addition to the Supreme Court, being familiar with the U.S. Court of Appeals, being familiar with the U.S. District Courts. And so we talk about that in the slide presentation. The book talks about it. You should be familiar with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. That's actually Georgia's judicial circuit. You should be familiar with the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. That is Georgia. That is Kennesaw State's federal district court. We talk a little bit about how judges are confirmed. You should be familiar with this. We talk a little bit about the types of cases that are heard in federal court versus the types of cases that are heard in state court. So in many ways, a lot of information. And I encourage you all to read the chapter, to look at the slides, to look at the key terms. If you get a chance to watch the video, the voiceover on the PowerPoints, that'd be particularly useful to you. But also start to be gathering the information that you need to be successful on the midterm. The midterm is not that far away, and I want you all to be successful. So far this semester, most of us have done really well. It would be very much a shame for all of the A's and B's that we have in this course to slip a letter grade just because of a little bit more difficulty, because it's more difficult to be familiar with what happened in 7 different chapters and to answer 40 questions about 7 chapters than it is to answer 5 questions about 2. So in any case, if you're having any questions, any concerns or problems, I strongly encourage you to go ahead and to contact me, send me emails. That's probably the best way to contact me. Thank you.